The chains around my wrists were still warm from the fire that broke my ship. I could smell smoke on my own skin. My lungs burned with every breath because my collar was cracked, and the air on this human vessel was thinner than what my body needed. I was on my knees in a metal room with bright white light, and for the first time in 17 years of war, I did not know what was going to happen to me next. My name is Kra, and among my people, the Threshka, I am known as the Unmaker. I broke 14 enemy champions in single combat. I ended 3 fleets. I never once bowed my head to anyone. Pain does not scare me. Death does not scare me. What scares a warrior like me is not knowing the shape of what comes next. So when the door of my cell slid open and a human walked in alone, without a weapon, without guards, I expected a trick. I expected this to be the moment they broke me before the real questioning began. I bared my teeth at her, every row of them, the same look that had made grown soldiers drop their weapons and run. She did not run. She did not even blink. She was small compared to me, with short brown hair tied back and a tool case hanging from her shoulder. She looked at me the way a person looks at a machine that needs repair, not the way a person looks at a monster. "Hold still," she said. "Your collar is cracked. If I don't fix it, you're going to stop breathing properly in about 6 hours. You should fear me," I said, my voice rough and low. "I should probably fix your collar first," she said. "Fear you after. I have a schedule." I let her come closer, only because I was too weak to stop her, and because some small part of me, the part that had survived 1,000 battles by reading intentions before actions, sensed that she meant what she said. Her hands were steady on my throat. She hummed a quiet tune while she worked, as if I were nothing more than a broken door hinge. "Why do you help me?" I asked when the hissing pain in my collar eased. "I am your enemy. I have ended many of your people in battle." She did not stop working. "You're hurt. I fix hurt things. That's the job. I am not a thing." She looked up at me then, just for a moment. "No, you're not. That's exactly my point." I had no answer for that. Among my people, kindness shown to a defeated enemy is a lie, a coin paid before a killing blow. I waited for the hidden knife, the poison in my food, the betrayal that would follow her gentle words. It never came. Her name, I learned later, was Laura Bennett, and she was the chief engineer of this small human research vessel called the Halcyon. She was not a soldier. She was not trained to hate me. She had simply been given the task of keeping the ship and everything on it, including its prisoner, in working order. Over the days that followed, she returned again and again, not to question me, not to threaten me, but to check on my collar, to bring data slates when I demanded to understand my captors, to ask if the recycled air suited my lungs. Each time I tested her, I told her stories of the battles I had won, the enemies I had crushed, hoping to see fear finally rise in her eyes. She only listened, asked questions, and once said that it sounded like I had lived a very lonely life. That comment stayed with me longer than any insult ever had. On what the humans called the 4th day, the ship's automatic systems failed to deliver my scheduled meal. A full rotation passed without food. My body, already weakened from the crash and the thin air, began to shake. When Laura discovered the mistake, she did not call an officer. She did not file a complaint through the proper channels the way I expected a disciplined crew member to do. She simply reached into her own pocket, pulled out a small ration bar, broke it in half, and pushed it through the bars of my cell. "Eat," she said. "You're no good to argue with me on an empty stomach." I stared at that broken piece of bread longer than I had ever stared down a blade in combat. "You would go hungry for an enemy?" "I won't go hungry," she said, shrugging like it cost her nothing, though I could see the tiredness in her face. "I'll just be a little hungry until dinner. There's a difference." That was the moment something inside me, something that had never bent in 17 years of war, began to crack. I did not understand it then. I only understood that this small, unarmed human had done something no enemy had ever done to me. She had looked at the Unmaker, the breaker of 14 champions, and had not seen a weapon to be destroyed or a prize to be used. She had seen someone who was hungry, and she had shared what little she had. I asked her once why her people had not simply left me to die when they found me in the wreckage of my ship. It would have been easier. It would have been safer. She told me that leaving me to die was never something anyone on this ship had considered, because it was not the kind of people they were. I told her this made no sense to me, that mercy without gain was a weakness that any smart enemy would use against them. She smiled at that, a small, tired smile. Maybe, or maybe it's the reason we win in the end. Not because we're strong, because we don't stop being decent, even when it would be easier not to. I laughed at her then, a low, rough sound that I had not made since before the war began. You believe kindness is a weapon. I believe kindness is a choice, she said, every single day. Even toward someone like you. I did not understand what she meant by that at the time, but I would come to understand it very soon, in a way that would change everything I believed about my own people and hers. On the 7th day, 3 armored soldiers arrived at my cell. Their leader, a tall man named Daniel Foss, carried orders on a data slate. He read them aloud in a flat, official voice. I was to be moved to what he called proper processing, a phrase that in any language, on any world, meant something far worse than a locked cell and a cracked collar. I did not resist. I had already decided that if this was the end, I would meet it standing, the way a Threshka warrior should. I rose to my feet despite the pain still lingering in my chest, and I looked Daniel Foss directly in the eyes, refusing to show him fear. Before the soldiers could open my cell, Laura stepped between us. He's my responsibility, she said, her voice flat and steady, with none of the gentle warmth I had heard from her before. Chain of custody is mine. If you want him, you go through me and my report to the Commodore first. Daniel Foss hesitated. I watched his eyes shift, weighing something I could not see. It became clear to me then that Laura's word carried real weight on this ship. Weight she was now spending entirely on me, an enemy who had killed people from her own species, an enemy who owed her nothing and could offer her nothing in return. This isn't your call, Laura, Daniel said quietly. It is exactly my call, she answered. I logged the repair. I logged the feeding error. I'm the one who has kept this prisoner stable and alive for a week. If something happens to him under someone else's watch, that's on your report, not mine. Is that really what you want to explain to the Commodore? The soldiers left without me. I stood in my cell, long after the door had closed again, staring at the space where Laura had been standing between me and 3 armed men. I had faced death 1,000 times on the battlefield, and never once had it frightened me the way this moment did, because I could not understand it. I could not find the trick. I could not find the hidden blade. There was only a small human engineer who had risked her own standing, her own reputation, for a monster with more human deaths on his record than she could probably imagine. Why? I asked her later that night, when she came to check my collar one final time before her shift ended. Would you risk yourself for me? I have taken lives from your people. I have earned nothing from you but hatred. She sat down on the small metal bench outside my cell, tired in a way I had not seen from her before. Because that's not how this works, Kra. We don't decide who deserves basic decency based on what they've done to us. If we did that, we'd be no different from the things we fight against. Your commanders do not agree with you. Some don't, she admitted. But I don't answer to them on this. I answer to myself. And I couldn't live with handing you over to something I know is wrong, just because it would be easier, or because you're supposed to be my enemy. I searched her face for the lie, for the hidden motive, the way I had been trained to search an opponent's stance for the moment before an attack. I found nothing, only tiredness, and a strange, stubborn certainty that she was doing the right thing, even though it cost her something real. I have survived 1,000 duels by learning my enemy's strength and turning it against them. I searched for Laura's weakness the way I searched for any opponent's, and I found none that I could use. She had no hidden cruelty, no leash of duty pulling her strings. Only a simple, stubborn decency that expected nothing in return, and it was, I came to realize, the single most disarming thing I had ever encountered in 17 years of war. You cannot block kindness with a shield. You cannot cut through patience with a blade. It simply stands there, calm as still water, until even the hardest stone begins to wear down beneath it. Over the following weeks, as the Halcyon continued its journey toward a human outpost where I would eventually be transferred, Laura and I spoke often. She told me about her home, a small town with green fields and a river that flooded every spring. She told me about her brother, a man named Peter, who had died in the early days of the war, and how she had chosen to join this ship, not out of hatred for my people, but out of a hope that understanding might end the fighting faster than more battles ever could. I told her about my own home, the mountains of Threshka Prime, the ceremonies of my people, the way a warrior earns their name through combat and sacrifice. I told her about my mother, who had died defending our territory before the war with humans had even begun, and how I had grown up believing that strength was the only language any enemy could understand. "And now?" Laura asked me one evening, "do you still believe that?" I thought carefully before answering, because I did not want to give her a false response simply to please her. "I do not know anymore. I have broken 14 champions with strength alone. None of them changed anything in me. You have broken something in me with a piece of bread and a few kind words, and I do not fully understand how." She smiled at that, a real smile this time, not the tired one I had grown used to. Maybe that's the point. Strength makes people afraid of you. Kindness makes people want to understand you. Those are very different things, Kra. There came a day, near the end of our journey, when the ship suffered damage from a debris field we passed through too quickly. Alarms rang through every corridor. I heard shouting, the sound of metal bending, and then silence in the section where I knew Laura's workshop was located. My cell door had been damaged in the impact, its lock no longer sealed properly. For the first time since my capture, I was free to move. I could have run. I could have found a way off this ship, back to my own people, back to the war that had shaped my entire life. Instead, I found myself moving toward the sound of Laura's voice, calling weakly from beneath a collapsed section of the ship's frame. I found her pinned beneath a fallen support beam, her leg trapped, her face pale with pain. Around her, sparks fell from damaged wiring, and the air was thick with smoke. "Kra," she said, surprised to see me standing free before her. "You should be running." "I should," I agreed, already moving to lift the beam from her leg. My strength, the same strength I had used to break 14 champions in combat, now strained against twisted metal instead of an enemy's armor. But I find I am not interested in running today. I pulled the beam free, and though her leg was injured, she was no longer trapped. I lifted her carefully, the way I had once lifted fallen comrades from a battlefield, and carried her through the smoke toward the medical bay, ignoring the shouts of soldiers who saw an enemy warrior carrying their engineer through a burning corridor, and did not know whether to raise their weapons or step aside. They stepped aside. When Laura woke in the medical bay hours later, her leg wrapped and stabilized, she found me standing quietly by her bed, my chains still hanging loose from my wrists, because no one had bothered to replace them, and because I had made no attempt to remove them entirely. "You could have escaped," she said softly. "I know. Why didn't you?" I thought about the mountains of my home, the war that had taken my mother, the 14 champions I had broken, to earn the name Unmaker. I thought about all of it, and then I looked at this small, tired human who had shared her food with an enemy and stood between him and men who wished him harm, simply because it was the right thing to do. "Because you taught me something no battle ever could," I said. "Strength can break an enemy. It cannot change one. You changed me, Laura Bennett, not with a weapon, but with half a piece of bread, and the simple choice to be decent, when it would have been easier not to be." She reached out and placed her hand over mine, small against the size of my own. "That's the thing about kindness, Kra. It doesn't need to be big to matter. It just needs to be real." When the Halcyon finally reached the human outpost, there was discussion among the officers about what should happen to me next. Some wanted me held as a prisoner of war. Others wanted me questioned for information about my people's fleet movements. It was Laura who stood before the Commodore himself and spoke on my behalf, telling him what I had done during the accident, how I had chosen to save her life instead of fleeing, how 17 years of war had not prepared her for the kind of person she had found beneath the reputation of the Unmaker. The Commodore, a quiet man named Edward Marsh, listened carefully to everything she said. In the end, he made a decision that surprised everyone on that ship, myself included. Instead of a prison cell, I was given a place as an advisor, someone who understood the Threshka fleet from the inside, and who might help both sides find a way toward peace instead of further war. It was not the ending I had ever imagined for myself. I had spent 17 years believing that strength alone determined the outcome of every conflict, that mercy was a weakness the strong could not afford. I had broken 14 champions and believed myself unbreakable in return. I was wrong. I was broken not by a blade, not by a fleet, not by an enemy stronger than myself, but by a human engineer with tired eyes and steady hands, who looked at a monster covered in the blood of her own people and chose, again and again, to see someone worth helping instead. I have never bowed to an enemy in my entire life. I bowed to her. And in that single, quiet moment, 17 years of war began to feel like something that could finally end, not through strength, but through the simple, stubborn choice to be kind, even when it would have been so much easier not to be.